Okay, so we're going to look at this topic, in-kind contributions, I suppose, various types and the rules and regulations regarding eligibility and so forth. That's great. Okay, so this is the content really, with definition, the legal framework, types, I suppose, the rules and eligibility, how to deal with in-kind, unpaid voluntary work, maximum. Okay, the maximum amount, there's a cap basically on in-kind contributions, and some programs allow in-kind contributions and some don't, so we're just going to have a quick summary of those as well. So just to basically explain what programs deem in-kind eligible and what programs don't. Next slide, please. Okay, so I suppose the definition is an in-kind contribution is a contribution of a good or service other than money. I suppose really what it is, it's a donation to the project for which the project does not have to make any payment. And the test really is, I suppose, to determine whether a contribution is made to a project is considered in-kind or not, is whether basically the project partner has written a check for it and sent paid for it. If a check has been issued, basically, obviously, it doesn't qualify as in-kind contribution because it's sort of based on real costs, like, you know. So that's the simple test, and really, like, you know. Next slide. Okay, so Article 69 of the Regulation 1303/2013 basically outlines the specific rules surrounding contributions in kind. So the article states that contributions in kind may be eligible on condition that the eligibility rules of the European Structural and Investment ESI funds and programs allow basically for such contributions to be declared. So if the ESI funds allow it and the program rules allow in-kind contributions, they can be declared. Next slide. Okay, so what types of contributions can be reported? So they can consist of works or goods or services or land or real estate, and again, for which no cash payment supported by invoices or documents of equivalent probative value have been made by the partner. So again, as I said, the test really is to determine whether a check has been issued or not. If a check has been issued, then it doesn't qualify as in-kind. If a check hasn't been issued, it may qualify for subject to certain conditions as in-kind cost. Next slide. Okay, so I suppose the in-kind contribution is a break with the principle of real costs actually incurred by the partner. I mean, you've heard from previous workshops and presentations over the years where we've always said that for expenditure to be eligible, to be reported, it must be eligible, incurred, and actually paid out. In other words, a payment through your bank account, a check or a direct debit from your bank account has been processed. And in this case here, basically what we're saying here is that it qualifies as if basically there's no payment as an in-kind contribution. So as with the core of in-kind is that there's no expenditure has actually been incurred by the project partner. And on the other hand, then I suppose the project partner is getting a resource that they can use to implement a project for which they didn't have to make a payment or incur a cost for that resource. So next slide, please. So on the rule, and I suppose on the eligibility rules of eligibility, okay, so it's only public or private in-kind contributions from organisations outside the partnership are eligible. So you can't have a situation where, for argument's sake, a project partner in a project decides to buy equipment or service or whatever, and then subsequently pays for those, and then subsequently decides to donate them to some other partner on the project. That basically is out of the question. So that's why it says that it must be a public or private from contribution from outside partnership are only eligible. Okay, the value of the contribution claimed must not exceed the normal market costs, and the rationale for the value given in the claim must be capable of being verified. So again, you can have a situation where you're declaring a cost or an in-kind cost that's costing more than what the purchase or market value of the similar item or service or whatever on the open market will cost, and you have to have basically a basis for valuing that particular in-kind cost. So I suppose we have an example here where a project receives a donation of a vehicle. It would be expected that the prices for vehicles of a similar model, age and condition would be sourced for comparison. So if I can take a new maybe minibus provider or something to a project, or a new van or something basically, or an old van or whatever, you can't be you have to have a basis basically for being able to put a value on that in-kind cost. So I mean, again, you may need to take it to a supplier to get a value on it, or maybe to look at, I suppose, what similar vehicles will cost at various sources, maybe on different websites and so forth or whatever. So basically, what they're saying there is you can't be putting in the cost for, say, a new van basically when it's a second hand or an old van that's been in use for a number of years. Next slide, please. Okay, in the case of provision of land or real estate, the value of the land or real estate must be certified by an independent qualified valuer or duly authorised official body. I mean, it's probably fairly straightforward here. I mean, you would have to get a value either by an auctioneer or maybe an engineer or someone that specialises in that, depending on the type of land or type of real estate, whatever it is, a building or some stately house or something, whatever. I mean, obviously you'd have to get the appropriate valuations carried out. The in-kind contribution in kind in the form of unpaid work, that's probably the one we see more regularly than any of the previous ones. And again, here the value of that work is determined by taking into account the verified time spent and the rate of remuneration for the equivalent work. So therefore, you're looking at basically timesheets and a methodology for basically valuing the in-kind volunteer time for the in-kind work carried out. Okay, next slide, please. In-kind in the form of equipment can be deemed eligible so far as the item of equipment was not previously paid for or co-financed by European funds. So again, if there's a particular machine or something that's contributed to a project or given as an in-kind contribution to a project, it is a possibility it could be funded from previous programs or previous structural funds. You'd have to check basically the origin. So you'd need some sort of a statement from the individual or organisation that provided that in-kind contribution, stating whether they previously had been funded by structured funds or some other type of funds or whatever, and that would need to be, and again, obviously, the value of it, or maybe the original cost price of whatever would have to be provided as could be used as a basis for valuing that in-kind contribution. And again, contributions in kind are only eligible if they are included in the approved application form. So, realistically, at application stage, if you're planning to, planning to basically contribute, or some agency is planning to basically contribute to your project or whatever, and it's going to be in the form of in kind, that would have to be factored in at application stage. Now, I have seen scenarios where a project has gone back and had their application form revised or whatever to include an in-kind contribution that was subsequently basically made available to the project to assist with the implementation of it. So again, there are all issues that would have to be considered at the application stage. But yes, you can have your application form revised down the road if such a contribution does arise. Next slide, please. Okay, so how to deal with the in-kind contributions? Okay, they can be declared under 4 budget lines: or staff costs, external expertise and services, equipment and infrastructure and works. Basically, the normal budget lines. Next slide. Okay, the in-kind cost contribution should be included under the same budget lines as the real cost equivalent. So, as I said there, for example, voluntary labour should be accounted for under staff costs. Your donations of machinery should be accounted under equipment. Donations of land or real estate should be included under the infrastructure and works budget line. Next slide, please. Okay, unpaid voluntary work. I suppose realistically, over the last number of years, from my experience in FLC, we have come across very few scenarios where in-kind contributions have been reported, but the one that seems to be more popular is the voluntary work, basically, that project partners have used. So again, in terms of that, like, it's unpaid voluntary work is defined as work which is carried out for the benefit of the project carried out on the basis of the volunteer's own will and without receiving any financial compensation for it, basically. Volunteers' work cannot be part of paid assignments of the volunteers and should not be assigned to employees receiving remuneration from a project partner or any other organisation. So I suppose, basically speaking, you can have a situation where, say, one project partner decides to carry out voluntary work for another partner in the project, yet that partner is being paid by the project that they're basically assigned to. So it has to be someone that's as a volunteer, basically, and that the only connection with the project is that they've agreed to maybe carry out a survey or assist with the project on a voluntary basis, like, you know. So, and they're not receiving any funding from either the partner that they're providing the service to or from any other agency that they're employed by, basically. So that's basically what's more or less what's covered in that slide. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, unpaid work cannot be assigned for statutory tasks of institutions, and neither for the project or financial management. Instead, the unpaid work should have a specific purpose, contribute to the content of the project, and should be limited to a certain time period. The results of the unpaid work should be an added value to the project and contribute to the successful delivery of the project's outputs, basically. So, again, that's fairly straightforward enough, that there should be time constraints or whatever, and that it should be for specific tasks. As I said, if your project was a part of the project, maybe it might be to organise local meetings in the community or whatever, or maybe to carry out door-to-door surveys in the community or whatever, and that volunteers would obviously organise a meeting and public meeting or whatever to discuss whatever activities that they're planning to do in the area, and maybe determine if it's going to have an impact on the local environment or areas. So that maybe that type of activity, basically, would be deemed suitable for volunteers to undertake. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this was, as I said, for the unpaid voluntary work, the documentation required. So there should be a signed agreement between the volunteer and the organisation specifying the duration and conditions of the unpaid work, and signed timesheets indicating the hours undertaken by the volunteer to the project. And again, the timesheets will be countersigned by line manager or project manager for the project, and documented time, basically. And again, fill in the timesheets. I mean, maybe just to put in, I suppose, a description of what was carried out, the activities. Is just not simple to say that I worked on project X for 10 hours or whatever. Maybe just to put in a description of maybe what was involved or what they undertook for those 10 hours, or what the activities they carried out, because that can be one of the items and a lot of timesheets that come in to us from time to time, is that there's very little information on it in terms of the activities, and it mightn't even be reference to the work packages that they were carrying out their work for, basically. And that also goes for timesheets that are coming in from staff that are paid by the project, like, you know. So we tend to tell projects, that to put a bit of information in the timesheet so we can see exactly what's being undertaken and what is being carried out as part of the assignment for the project. Next slide, please. Okay, so I suppose how to value and the rates of remuneration. The rate of remuneration for unpaid work in Ireland is currently set at €157 per day, and this rate is based on a daily rate of 8 hours per day, which works out around, I think, just under €20 or thereabouts, whatever. Now, this is coming from the Commission decision, which was published back in April 2019. The caption of it there, authorising the use of unit costs for declaring personal costs for work carried out by a volunteer under an action or a work programme. So obviously the Commission we carried out a study, or conducted a study, basically into how be able to value volunteers' times and to come up with a rate that could be used to cost out the activities or whatever. And they carried out a review, basically, in various member states, and came up with I suppose a per diem rate per day based on 8 hours. So and that was published in that Commission decision back in April 2019. Now, anybody wants that, we can circulate that to them by all means. The next slide, actually, if we can just move on there, will give us an overall summary of the rates that were published by the Commission in that decision for each of the member states, or for a group of member states. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's an extract basically from that Commission decision, basically. So you can see there at the top that Denmark and Ireland, Luxembourg and Netherlands and Austria and Sweden and so forth, the daily rate is 157, and then you can see on down along there Belgium, Germany and the UK 131, and Czech Republic and Cyprus and Malta and Portugal 78, and the bottom there then you have Hungary, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and Bulgaria and Estonia at 47. So again, as I said, if anybody wants that document, we can circulate that, and by all means. So that's just an extract really from the summary of that document of those particular rates. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically, when it comes to in-kind contributions, there's a cap on in-kind contribution. So the total amount paid to the project from the programme cannot exceed the amount of real costs that partners have incurred. So, in other words, what the percentage of eligible expenditure consisting of an in-kind contribution may not exceed the co-financing rate of the project. So we have a little example here. If you just move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we have a project here, and the project has a budget of €200,000 with a co-financing rate of 60%. So this would mean basically that the project would receive 120,000 of the RDF funding for that project. The partner's own match funding basically is 80,000. So, however, when the project compiles its claim, the expenditure is as follows. So just move on to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. So we're assuming here the project's got an in-kind contribution of 100,000. The real cost is 100,000. So therefore, you can see our budget there, total of 200,000. So the programme payment, okay, to the project would be capped at 100,000 as the total amount of cash paid out by the project partners, reducing the co-financing rate to 50%. The project, so basically here is that the project basically can't receive any more funding over and above the in-kind contribution. So the in-kind contribution, the partnership can basically consider that when they're budgeting and managing, that they have sufficient real costs available basically to draw down the full amount of their budget. So there's a cap on it basically there, and the co-financing rate has dropped down to 50% because they've put in 100,000 for in-kind contributions, and the real cost for only 100,000. So the max year budget was 200,000. So the max that they can receive from the programme is 100,000. Now, that's normally checked at the end of particularly where a project has reported or has built in-kind contributions in their budget. That's normally checked at the end of the project to ensure that they haven't exceeded or received more co-financing than they should have received, basically one above what real cost they incurred. So that's more or less really what they're coming at there. It's just to ensure that it's basically just to ensure that the project partner doesn't receive more ERDF funding over and above what basically they should have received based on the initial budget at the start of the project. So okay, next slide, please. I think I'm coming. Yeah, okay. So as I mentioned at the start there, some programs allow contribution accounting to be part of the project budget and cleared, some don't. So Interreg Europe, they're not eligible for funding under Interreg Europe, and Northwest Europe, they are, and that's where we've seen a few of them over the years coming in there in Northwest Europe funded programs. Northern Prify and Arctic program allowed them, Ireland Wales allowed them, RBACT not eligible, and I haven't seen them, and they're not eligible basically under the RBACT program. So that's more or less a summary of the programs there that do allow and don't allow in-kind contributions as part of the overall funding for project partners. Okay, next slide, please.